Okay, this is a recording of a fellow named Dietrich Klinghardt. Klinghardt. Dietrich Klinghardt. Dietrich. Dietrich Klinghardt is a guy who has been spending 10 or 20 years observing the effects of cell phones and microwave radiation on Alzheimer's and autism and human behavior. It's very interesting. I'm going to try to record some of this. This is from the healthmeans.com website.
Joining us on the summit today is Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, the well-known integrative physician who's been very outspoken and pioneering on a number of issues, including electromagnetic radiation and its effects and what we can do to protect ourselves. So Dr. Klinghardt, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a joy, Josh, to talk to you.
You too, again. Yeah, we last chatted, I guess, on camera a number of years ago in Take Back Your Power. So thanks for making time for to catch up with us again. You're currently in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm just south of London with Daniela, who is the co-founder of my work here in Europe.
Excellent. So I'll share with our audience your background in brief, and then we'll dive in. So Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt is founder of the Klinghardt Institute and Klinghardt Education in the UK, the American Association of Neurotherapy, and is lead clinician at the Sophia Health Institute located in Woodinville, Washington. He's also founder and chairman of the Institute for Neurobiology in Germany, and Dr. Klinghardt has written several books, the latest of which is on Lyme disease, called The Biological Treatment of Lyme Disease, currently available in German. And I want to read that in English, so keep me posted. In recognition of his pioneering work, Dr. Klinghardt has received numerous awards in the USA. So just diving in, I mean, you are recognized around the world for your insights, and you're helping to bring the conversation forward, both in terms of awareness and specifically in solution and what's working. So just diving in, what have you noticed going back to 3G and 4G even in effects on your patients and within the body of science?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing I think that sets me aside maybe from some other more well-known speakers is I actually see patients every day and follow them and their families for 10 years, 20 years. I've been in practice now 45 years, and so I have an overview of a longitudinal development of children, adults, their children, and in conclusion, I can say 3G was an absolute disaster, and it is very clear from the physics of it that 5G is going to be disaster squared, and so, but here's some of the facts. So it's important for people to understand that it's not just the amplitude, the strength of the signal, but it's the frequency that decides what the biological effects are of a radiation that hits us. And so many of the listeners will know that the RIFE technology or frequency-specific microcurrent, that any of these technologies you can use for healing and you can use for destruction. And it is very clear that 2.4 gigahertz was used intentionally for destruction. It was developed in England to make masses of the population docile.
With Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz.
You used the 2.4 gigahertz to make population docile, but also before it was mass introduced, it was known that over 2 or 3 generations of exposure, it would turn an entire population infertile, which is the effects of that which we are seeing. That was the research that was related to us by Barry Trower, a scientist from England who was highly involved in this and is now trying to warn against the effects of this. And I know you're aware of Barry and his work. And so, but it is very, very clear, like as a medical doctor, that we have a crisis of infertility. In the time since Wi-Fi was instituted, the sperm count in men has dropped by more than half, and fertility rates have dramatically gone down. There is other factors involved. We know that there's certain aspects of the vaccines which I cannot mention here, and certain environmental toxins that are in our food that also contribute to that. But Wi-Fi has played a huge role. And so where I come into the whole thing is in 2005, the Karolinska Institute, Ole Johansen, published a wonderful research paper where he looked at the incidence of Alzheimer's disease in populations in Sweden and the exposure to Wi-Fi. And there was a clear high correlation between Wi-Fi exposure and the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And if you roll it forward, and he warned that this is going to cause a mass disaster. Come 2019, the estimate is that half the population alive today will die with or of Alzheimer's disease. That is entirely driven by Wi-Fi, by the exposure to Wi-Fi. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. That actually is not waiting to happen, it's already happening. And if you ever work in my office, I invite anyone, any politician listening to this, to come to my office and watch a whole day of children with autism and adults with Alzheimer's disease. And when you actually see that that you can reverse many cases of autism by simply protecting the children from the exposure to Wi-Fi, you don't need any scientific study, to see the results of that. And when you see that you can reverse at least many of the early cases of Alzheimer's disease by simply protecting the adult from the exposure to Wi-Fi, you don't need a scientific study to tell you that we're in the midst of a huge disaster. The same as with women that are infertile. Some of that is reversible by protecting them from Wi-Fi. So, in short, the 2.4 gigahertz used in 3G, and most of the 3G, was an absolute disaster that was very well documented in the scientific literature. And we all had expected that common sense would prevail, that the studies that are out there at least would have led to other good studies that would have shown that this is unsustainable for human evolution, and that has not happened. I want to remind the people that are watching this that several years ago was a court case in Italy where a young man died of brain cancer, and then his mother sued the company that he was working for that had forced him to use the cell phone all day long. And so the judge, in his wisdom, did a very simple thing in court. He had the side that defended the client make a pile of all the scientific studies that showed Wi-Fi causes brain cancer and is dangerous. And the other side, the industry, making a pile of papers of the things that show Wi-Fi was safe. And it was a much, much larger pile. And then the judge, having Italian common sense, said, okay, now let's remove all the papers that were sponsored by the Wi-Fi industry. And that pile went to zero, and the other pile stayed the same it was before. And the judge ruled the Wi-Fi industry is at fault, or the workplace is at fault for causing brain cancer. And that case stands. And I wished American judges would use the same kind of wisdom. There's a problem in America is that the judges are elected officials that don't even have to study law to become a judge. And it's a disaster that sometimes people become judges that never even graduated from high school. And so reading or understanding science or scientific studies is not part of their armamentarium. And so America is kind of heading for a big disaster in that way. But so just to maybe say this very clearly, you know that I about 15 years ago we did some work.
And also realize that people who work with the airport security systems, which have intense, constant, heavy radiation, microwave radiation bombardment, and people who work in law enforcement and first response also are surrounded by heavy communications, microwave powers all around them. They are experiencing like enormously larger than ordinary afflictions of many sorts. So what if these things are affecting even the electrical function of the heart? Of course.
12 years ago, we did some measurements for autistic children. Basically, we had a control group of 10 healthy children and a group of 10 autistic kids. We went to their homes where the mother was when she was pregnant, and we constructed the same Wi-Fi router and the same conditions and measured that the moms that gave birth to a child that was later diagnosed with autism were exposed to over 20-fold the amount of Wi-Fi radiation than the mothers that gave birth to a child that gave birth to a normal, typical child. More than 20-fold. And I tried at the time to get the study published. I couldn't find anybody interested. In fact, I got one threatening letter back, and so I decided to cool it until at the time wasn't right for it. So since then, however, I've been treating the autistic children that come to my practice very rigorously. That the condition number one on day one of the first visit, the parents get the Wi-Fi talk how they need to protect the child. And they need to get rid of the Wi-Fi router altogether in the house. They need to switch off the fuses at night. They need to get a sleep sanctuary, the protective cloth of their bed, and the kids need to wear protective clothing.
Okay, so what you're seeing results, Dietrich, in cutting the Wi-Fi and protecting autistic kids from Wi-Fi radiation, especially in their sleeping areas. What else in terms of protective measures has worked and is working to help restore health?
Yeah, let me be very clear. So there is daytime strategies, there is nighttime strategies, and there is external protection and there's internal protection. Let me go through that. Yeah, so the nighttime strategy is pretty clearly at nighttime. We request that the children have the sleep sanctuary that is like a mosquito net, the silver-coated cloth. Now there is newer materials that are coming out now that are probably more suited to shield against the 5G. We don't know that for sure yet, but the Swiss Shield was the name of the cloth that the mosquito net was sewn from, and that had to enclose the entire child, had to be over the child and under the child and make a Faraday cage. And what people forgot very often is that shield needs to be grounded. It needs to be a wire coming from that conductive cloth running into the earth. There was a foul compromise to use the earth in the electric outlets, but there was very often the only thing we can do if people live in the 7th floor of a high-rise apartment. We could not request that they run a wire alongside the house down on the ground. So we use the ground in the outlet. So that's number one. Number two, the sleep sanctuary becomes dangerous if you have strong pulsating electric fields in the room. So we requested at least that room, the fuses that are responsible for the electric outlets in that room and the electric wiring in the walls of the room, they have to be out for the night, ideally the whole house. That's the nighttime strategy that works. And daytime strategy is even that with autistic kids, parents have to get a wired connection. The router has to be off, has to be on a mode that doesn't broadcast. Now, it used to be a simple thing in the computer where you could switch off the broadcasting option of the Wi-Fi router. Now, the modern routers do no longer have that option. They're intentionally wired the way you cannot switch them off. And so we back them. We have the little company, littletreegroup.com here in Seattle. That's Lynn. She's a retired woman. She sews these bags out of the Swiss shield, and you can single or double bag the Wi-Fi router to make sure it's off. So that's one part. But during the daytime, when the kid runs around, we have two strategies that work. One is protective clothing. I know there is a lot of stupid discussion going on. People have a strong opinion that the clothing is dangerous and doesn't work, and people having the opinion that it does work. Well, I have 20 years of experience that it does work. And I don't give a hoot about anybody's opinion. The clothing does work. Metal deflects Wi-Fi, and basically we want to turn the children in the night in shining armor, where the larger the body areas that are covered with deflective cloth, the better the children are doing. That's also the main part of the external protection, but the internal protection is, first of all, there's several natural products that hugely enhance the ability of the body to not absorb radio waves. And that is a tincture of rosemary, propolis from the bees, and cilantro or coriander. And so there's a British company, KI Science, makes a product called Ray Wave. And so we have all the children on that. And the more they take, the more stable they are. The second company also has developed a cream, a skin cream, that makes the skin reflective of Wi-Fi. It contains saffron and several other really precious herbal ingredients. There's nothing chemical in it. And so we found when the kids are basically leathered up in the cream in the morning, and then they go to whatever they go to, special schools and special kindergartens or are at home environment, and now some electric circuits are on because the parents need to work and they need to have lights and the fridge needs to be on. That has been hugely protective. It's called the E-Shield cream or E-Shield lotion. I could go into details. Maybe one more detail that we found. This is more for adults with electrohypersensitivity. We found if you give astronomically high amount of methylated folate, that almost everybody within 3 to 4 months becomes neurotypical in terms of their responses to the Wi-Fi environment, being outside in electric environments or being close to a cell phone tower. They no longer have the neurological symptoms, but this is like 20 to 50 milligrams of methylated folate, which many practitioners are scared of, is a small possible cancer link later in life, but it's absolutely life-saving for a lot of my extremely hypersensitive patients. So that's a little bit on the internal protection. Then
let me just jump in there quickly. Is there a specific brand or type of methylated folate that you found best?
No, that's now marketed by many most of them have offer 0.5 milligrams or 1 milligrams. There is one company, I forgot what the name of it, metabolic something. They produce at least a 10 and a 20 milligram methylated folate. That makes it a lot easier, especially for the autistic kids. Now, many autistic kids are undermethylated, and there's certain symptoms, I'm not going to go into that, of undermethylation. And then when you actually give them high doses of methylation, after a few months, it flips, that they become hypermethylated, and then you need to stop. But you recognize it, that the behavior gets better and better and better, even in electric environments, and then suddenly it flips as if they're having a flare-up, and then now they're over-methylated, and then you have to stop for a few months. And that cycles forth and back between over and under. But I think these are sort of like the big strokes. But the important thing for me is it was absolutely stunning and amazing for me that I could really say that I have two groups of autistic children, the ones that get dramatically better and the ones that don't. And the ones that are getting dramatically better are the ones that following my EMR protection to a T. And the ones that are not getting better are the ones that think they are following it, but then, when I ask them unrehearsed, okay, what is it that you're actually doing? I realize they're making one mistake at another. They may have the sleep canopy, but they're not grounding it. Or they may even ground it, but they leave the fuses on for the electric circuitry in the room. Or they don't do any of the daytime protection, or they don't do the methylation. So there's usually something missing. But I think the truth is, we've established firmly in my clinical experience that the exposure to Wi-Fi has led to the biggest health crisis of our time, destroying the lives of children. Now, when I say autism, yes, that's the extreme, but the less injury is the hyperactivity, the attention deficit in children that is now the new normal. And the kids, instead of getting the advice to limit their Wi-Fi exposure and their radio wave exposure, they're put on Adderall and Ritalin and all the drugs that come down with a whole list of developmental problems that express themselves later in life. That means these kids are crippled for life, or really are becoming drug dependent for the rest of their life, which you may think sometimes may be an intent that's going to work in that whole thing. That lose their freedom and their medical independence, early on in life, by instead of being.
Okay. So the oversight of this entire thing is a single point. The powers in this world are actually on purpose increasing those things that afflict and ruin human lives. It's basically like putting human bodies into the burning hands of the idol Molech on purpose. And any research that is developed in order to expose the problems of human beings being hurt and killed and literally ruined. Any dissenting opinions are quickly called labels like conspiracy theorist, which is a term that was started by the CIA in order to try to slander and bring prejudice against people who are questioning the formal view or opinion of the government or the leadership. It was designed to get into people's emotions that, oh, that's a conspiracy theorist, is a way of slandering and pushing off the table. Oh, that's one of those religious nuts, pushing off the table serious questions that are being put on the table that are worthwhile. These are realities. These are the reasons why we turn to Mark 16 and say, Spirit of loving kindness, if we are about your true purpose, you will prevent us from having the afflictions and diseases. You will prevent us, even if we are ingesting poisons, we will not be affected. Even if we are being bombarded by poisons, we will not be affected, because we have become the ecclesia. We have become the servant royalty, the invisible servant royalty, dying to ourselves, killing many of our own personal best interests and comforts in order to be Yeshua, going from town to town, in order to support an outreach team that is full of the Holy Spirit, carrying the teachings of Christ and being the sent ones who gather the new Holy of Holies, which is a cluster of at least 2 or 3 men and their families, plus many singles helping them. That is the work of the ecclesia, the called out of the world servant royalty, a noble, kind royalty that literally are the suffering carriers of the broken human family. We are not royalty who exalt ourselves, but rather who humble ourselves and say, I am not worthy. But my friend, my invisible friend, is close, and he is worthy. And he gives me his mind. And I am his body, his worthiness here on the earth.